Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, the facilitator with Peter Scalzo, our host and long-term cancer survivor. And today we're going to do another round of our EHS devotionals that are pretty good. And it's still talking about being at the wall. And you and I think that this is probably one of the foremost, foremost formative, I'm using four twice, aren't I? Foremost formative experiences of our spiritual journey. And so, and when we think of formative years, we usually think of young, but these happen most, I think they tie so much with midlife crises so much. And I think a cancer journey, I would guess most cancer journeys happen as midlife crises, even though I know there's young cancer. And but would you?
Yeah,
does that,
I would think so. Right.
Does that ring true to you?
Yep.
And so in this particular devotional that's in the EHS, there's a passage from Romans that that Pete Scazzaro puts out there, and it really is something that just speaks to God and who He is, that He can't be questioned in a real sense. It's almost the same thing that Job said. He's like, "Were you there when I formed the storehouses of snow?" And this kind of concept, were you there when the foundations were laid for the earth? And Job had no answers then. And I think it's speaking to this. And I think the topic today is the holy unknowing, embracing the mystery of the holy unknowing, which is, it's a great principle when you're at the wall, is to recognize there's an unknowing that you actually have to accept. We talked about acceptance and purpose last time. This unknowing is a big part of trusting God. Is that
and acceptance?
And acceptance.
Yeah.
I think there's something there to digest. I'm going to read something that maybe helps do this. We've talked a few times about this Chinese proverb, and so out of this, I thought I would read the Chinese proverb because it was, it's a one that we've covered a few times, but it speaks to a little bit about how holy unknowing works. And so here we go. There's an old story about a wise man living on one of China's vast frontiers. One day, for no apparent reason, a young man's horse ran away and was taken by nomads across the border. Everyone tried to offer consolation for the man's bad fortune, but his father, a wise man, said, "What makes you so sure this is not a blessing?" Months later, his horse returned, bringing with her a magnificent stallion. This time everyone was full of congratulations for the son's good fortune. But now his father said, "What makes you so sure this isn't a disaster?" Their household was made richer for this fine horse the son loved to ride, but one day he fell off the horse and broke his hip. Once again, everyone offered their consolation for his bad luck. But his father said, "What makes you so sure this is not a blessing?" A year later, nomads invaded, and every able-bodied man was required to take up his bow and go into battle. The Chinese families living on the border lost 9 out of every 10 men who went to fight. Only because the son was lame did the father and his son survive to take care of each other. Often what appears to be success or blessing is actually a terrible thing. That appears to be a terrible event can turn out to be a rich blessing. And so that's the proverb. And that one stuck with me a bunch. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to guess that it sticks with you in the cancer journey. Do you care to elaborate a bit?
Yeah, I think at least I jumped to the conclusion that this is a tragedy when I was first diagnosed, and where is God in all of it? And for me, it's been 20 years, and it's really ongoing. So it's involved 6 recurrences, over 50 surgeries now, and lots of stuff. Immunotherapy treatments. I think there was a 7-year period where I maybe had a couple weeks off of doing anything medical. It was really, really busy. And so I think for me, it's each time, each scan or treatment or surgery or whatever was going on, it's like, well, this is horrible. This is a tragedy. How could God be working in this? That's kind of what my mind wanted. That's the place that my mind wanted to go, and certainly did for a couple of the major surgeries.
Can you give both sides of it from your journey? I'm actually, so you gave the side
Yeah.
of, hey, you get the bad news.
Yeah.
And your mind immediately, did what the crowd did in this proverb.
Yeah.
And what's the good news? Like, how did, but that actually wasn't really as good as what it was played out to be. I'm curious. Do you have that? Do you have both sides of this proverb in
I
your own
mean,
journey?
generally, rather than each specific incident, like this father kind of draws out each incident,
Yes.
but the sense of a person just kind of looking in through a portal into my life would be like, oh my gosh, all this tragic stuff is going on. It's like a Job-like thing happening. And yet, in all these instances, I was drawing closer to God because I needed to. I needed his comfort and assurance and peace. But he was using these times, these incidences to work in my life, but also work through my life. I mean, after 10 years, I started a public ministry. I didn't, God did. I was asked to speak at a Greater Danbury Prayer Breakfast. You were there. And that launched a public ministry. So now, okay, so you have this public ministry, you're speaking out, but that's given me a tremendous amount of joy and purpose, and really has, like, even doing podcasts with you, Sean, has allowed me to process a lot of stuff I hadn't processed. And it's wonderful to be able to process emotions, but also events and cancer and all that, walls in our lives. And I was at a gala and 3 people came up independently asking me for a book. And I'm like, I don't have a book and I don't want a book. And then a pastor came out of nowhere and said, God told me to tell you to write a book. It's like, all right, we'll get a book project going. And
don't ever trust people that say God told you that.
yeah, but it's been this, and then people come back and say, hey, you really spoke with me. Or I think someone asked me the other day, as a matter of fact, what do you think your purpose is in this cancer journey? And I said, it's as best as possible for me is to be a non-anxious presence and to speak hope. I don't have to give flowery discourses or know everything about the theology of suffering, like why does God allow these things to happen, all that. I just know that for me it was to exhibit a genuine peace, because it's not something that I can manufacture, but I do have peace. And then to provide, here's this. I mean, my doctors all the time say, Peter, you're an anomaly. My doctor said he presented my case in Vegas and Singapore. He's got 2 more places he's going to present it overseas. So here's this international case that goes on. And so what I thought was a complete tragedy, God has used for good. I mean, and not only my life, he changed the trajectory of my life. I was an attorney and I was on a certain path. He changed it. And I will honestly say that I enjoy what I'm doing.
Well, that's why that's the great thing about being the facilitators. We get to talk about your life. And
Let's talk about yours. I'm sick of my life. Let's talk about yours.
So as we go into yours, and I just avoid what you even said that, as we go into yours, it's like, think about all the things that have been thought of. So I'm going to go back a little ways to your 20s, I think.
Oh.
And so here you are, you married the homecoming queen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys are divorced today.
Yeah. Yeah.
You hit a wall. One of your 3 major walls was divorce.
Yeah.
You had a daughter with a drug addiction.
Yeah.
And you have this cancer journey. And so one would argue that that would have been the blessing. And in one sense, the blessings stacked up there. You had the homecoming queen, you had 6 kids.
Yeah.
And then on the back side of that, you had these major walls that came. And the thing that you would probably take away from any wall, and I think there's something that we're exploring because we're talking about going through the wall, and that's why we're doing these devos on the wall, because they're such an important part of formation, is to recognize that a wall is always a false view, meaning it's hardship to bring about something that is not a negative, but something that needed to grow that's a positive.
You've always said invitation. That's
It's
the
an
word
invitation.
you
That's right.
use. Yeah.
Yes. And I love this idea of
Yeah.
really, if once you recognize that that's the case,
Mm-hmm.
it's then can you lean into the wall and
Yeah,
not
because
bounce
then you
off of
said,
it?
can we synthesize or actually create walls? And
That
you're
has
like,
been,
no,
yeah.
we can't do that.
Yeah. So if you've been involved in any kind of, we call it discipleship in Christianity, this idea of how do you get people to grow? And once you recognize that the wall is one of the most powerful formative tools, there's a question, if you're going to do a discipleship program, do we synthesize walls so that we
Mhm.
can get people to grow?
Yeah.
Sounds a little bit like playing God, though, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I don't think you do that. I think what happens whenever you try to synthesize the wall is you begin to play God and you get
Right.
yourself into trouble.
And, again, the holy unknowing mystery, God knows exactly what time and in what way to do it.
Yes.
And I've experienced that. Like, wow, Lord, you knew exactly where to touch me and how to do this thing.
Well, I think this is the hard part. We've talked about this Genesis 50 concept a few times.
Yeah.
What you meant, meaning what Satan or what those who are performing evil mean for harm,
Mm-hmm.
God means for good. And that means that God has meaning in that suffering that's meant for good. And both things can be true at the same time. And this is almost like this idea of ambivalence. You feel two feelings and they both are true at the same time. One of them is a negative feeling and one of them is a positive feeling.
Mm.
And in this space here, I think when we hit walls, we tend to listen to our negative feelings, but there's something to be embraced about understanding that the joys that come through as we experience suffering, the joys of that can be experienced in the midst of those hardships. And so I think that's the piece that you're recognizing in your own journey.
I think James says it in the first chapter when he says, consider it all joy.
Count it all joy, yeah.
Yeah. And I've used that passage and spoken about it before, especially for earthquake events, not just, hey, I got a flat tire today or I need to get my whatever fixed. But those earthquake events like divorce or cancer, health events, things, the death of a child or problems with parents, these kinds of things. These are earthquake events in our lives. And James is like, consider it all joy. And he talks about this. If you make a choice, God wants to produce endurance. And this word endurance means really patient trust. And we've talked about patient trust before. And so there's something humbling and something wonderful about developing patient trust, but he does it through trials and suffering.
I think the thing that's interesting about this concept we're talking about here is holy unknowing is I've been thinking about this concept that John Eldridge talks about a lot, and it's the discipled by the internet. That we are disciples of the internet. And one of the big issues of being a disciple of the internet, and he talks about this quite a bit, is our instantaneous gratification. And an instantaneous gratification basically means in so many areas, like we don't leave a conversation with a question unanswered. And his words are, hey, if our ancient ancestors who were like the Desert Fathers or others were to see this, they would be appalled because there's something to be embraced in the holy unknowing and in the waiting. That's where that piece that you're talking about is like the waiting is where there's so much formation that takes place in waiting. And the fact that our culture and our times, we don't wait really brings that. And so we talked in our last podcast, there's certain things that can only be learned in a cancer journey. And so when you think about in a culture that's discipled by the internet, you can't rush a cancer journey, right? You have to do it one day at a time, waiting in the holy unknowing. You don't know the outcome. You don't know whether it's going to get better or worse. You have hope and you have hopes about what's going to happen, but you don't know.
Yeah.
Whether or not the next scan is going to look, did this tumor shrink or grow?
Right.
there's a period of waiting in this holy unknowing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you could speak to that a little bit about how that has affected your own spiritual journey of learning how to wait in the holy unknowing in a time where we're discipled by the internet
Mm-hmm.
and we had this thing inside of us that wants answers immediately.
Yeah.
And John's point is it brings something of a deeper connection with God. It's a trust that we have to develop in a sense.
Yeah, I always call it surrender and trust. But that word surrender, I think sometimes we view it as a negative, like, oh, the other side won and I'm going to surrender now to. But I think in our Christian walk, it means to recognize that God is on the throne and is all powerful and all loving. And can I surrender, even though I don't understand what he's doing or see where he's working, can I still surrender to his sovereignty in my life? In other words, can I put aside my agenda and put his on the throne? And so I think for me, serenity prayer is big. And I say that quite often, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But this concept of accepting, for instance, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, but living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time. But it's in that prayer, it talks about surrendering my will to his, that I may be reasonably happy in this life, supremely happy forever with him in the next. There's this surrender and acceptance kind of, I'm powerless and Lord, I need to surrender to you. And I think that for me in the cancer space, I think of times, for instance, going down to my doctor and it's my second round with immunotherapy, and I got a tumor the size of a softball in my neobladder, and Sloan had only seen that like 3 other times, so it was rare to get a tumor back in this intestinally created bladder inside of me. And when he, and I didn't know, I thought, well, they had basically given me an end-of-life prognosis, and he he put the camera inside of me to look at it, and it was gone. And he freaks out. The tumor's gone.
Yeah.
Well, I was just as surprised
as
everyone else.
Yeah.
But again, the holy unknowing, God, what are you doing now, Lord? But can I surrender and trust you? And I remember the bad diagnosis. I remember before this event, my oncologist, surgeon, and the fellow coming in, they had never done this before, and they put their hands on me, and the fellow was weeping, and it was, we're done. What you have inside of you is nasty, and it's all through. And so, again, can I trust you in that situation? And then, Lord, can I trust you in this situation where the tumors disappeared and they're saying miracle? And it's a journey, right? But I think it's for me personally, what it has developed in me is a humility that says I am really not in control, and I need to lean on.
I want to touch on that.
On the Lord. Yeah.
And because you brought up the serenity prayer again, and we've talked about the serenity prayer, and I put a term out there a few minutes ago, and it was ambivalence. And it's not a term that you hear that much these days, but there's a recognition that our human emotions are more complex than what we give ourselves credit for. And if we live in a discipled by the internet concept, meaning that we're always in a rush and information has to be now, we only connect with one set of emotions. And ambivalence implies that, no, actually there's the ability to feel multiple things at the same time. I can feel both fear and pleasure, or these types of things simultaneously. And I think if I get to that point where I am forced to slow down, I think what I'm really trying to relate to is that what happens in a cancer journey or at the wall is I slow down. And it's the one day at a time that you talked about. It was like the trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a day by day, minute by minute, not instantaneous,
Right.
but it's a waiting journey. And when you take time to slow down, I think that's why we talk so much about slowed down spirituality as being key to, really finding intimacy with God, is that we get to touch on the other parts of ourselves that are we rush past. And the thing that a cancer journey does, if anything, is it stops you in your tracks from your day to day, and your life becomes out of control.
Mm-hmm.
You become powerless, and it becomes one day at a time, a much slower journey. And then there's an invitation. Do you want to stop and feel?
Right. That's key.
And the feelings I'm not talking about aren't just the anger, sadness, resentment. It's the feelings that also come with trusting a power that loves you, that's higher than your own. And that's where intimacy is at, I think, and why so many people talk about, hey, there's a level of intimacy I could never get to without a cancer journey. And so I'm putting it back to you. Is there something to that as a kind of a concept that really resonates with what?
I think how other people phrase it is there's no atheists in foxholes.
Yeah.
But there's something about facing your mortality, and I've had to do that a bunch of times, where the doctors have actually said, okay, this is it, we're done.
The thing about your foxhole that I want to put with it, though, is that you did a 30-day journal right here on this podcast, and it was 30 days of just elongated days of just waiting for your body to heal, and you could do nothing. You were just sitting in this hospital room waiting, and it was like, and yet there was something in that waiting. That foxhole was hopelessness in one sense, because the diagnosis and the expectations were so little for survival.
I think there's something so attractive when we meet someone who has genuine patience in their lives. And in other words, they're content in the moment, no matter what situation they're in. There's something highly attractive to that, I think.
Yeah.
That sense of contentment, that no matter what's going on, I'm living in this moment. I'm surrendering it to God. That would be a Christian.
But not just buzzwords too, because you've heard that.
Yeah, no,
God's got this. God's got this without actually. Does he?
Right. Yeah, no, this is like, it's no matter what the outcome.
Yeah.
I'm going to trust in you. That's why I think when you have a metastatic cancer journey, to invest in a higher power and trust in him, and then understand your eternal destiny, I think is a huge comfort, because no matter what's going on, you can say, okay, like I talked to somebody recently, a Christian person, he said, well, I'm not afraid of death, I'm afraid of dying. And I'm like, because there's the process of getting to the death part. And I said, I get that, but I didn't say but to him. I was saying but in my own mind, there are, I've been through that process many times with people and through modern medicine and the comfort of others and love that people show you. You really can get through that process and actually get through it pretty well. It's difficult for everyone to go through, yourself and your family, but there are positives that happen in that process. But it is a scary process to think that at some point my heart's going to stop beating and then that's it. My physical body. I just lost a friend recently, one of my good buddies, and I went to the wake. It's Catholic, and his body was lying motionless there, and I was thinking, oh, buddy, your soul and spirit some other place right now. But I'm like, it's sad, man. I'm not going to be able to talk. We talked a lot. He was a double transplant patient, and then because of the anti-rejection drugs, the cancer kind of took over. He's 65 years of age. Great guy. And it was sad. It's sad. But it also is something that through that surrender and trust each moment, you can get through it. But yeah, it's not an easy, like, oh, I think I'll surrender and trust easily today. I went to Israel a bunch of times, as you know, and I got really close with a Messianic Jew over there who was our tour guide like 5 or 6 times, and Aryan. And so we always toured Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And I was a tour leader. She was the tour guide. And so many times she would explain to everyone on the bus that we don't solve the question of how could a good God allow the Holocaust to happen. We don't resolve it. She said, we discuss it, we talk about it, and we maybe argue about it, but it's left up to a mystery that we don't understand.
A holy unknowing.
The holy unknowing. And that's how they are able to function and deal with it. Now, they do have a saying, never again, but
yeah,
but it's there. They do have I think, a better understanding of the holy unknowing when they take that position than we do in the, what would you call an addiction to the internet, or what
disciple?
Disciple by the internet.
Yeah, that's Eldridge's term. I like it though. I think it really
it's
describes
good, right?
something of our current age.
Yeah.
I think the thing I think we're trying to really explore here was in the holy unknowing, as we're going through the wall, is there are things that can only be learned there, and experiences that you can only have there that are also deep and rich and intimate in the God and with our relationship with God that can only happen there.
It's the opposite of entitlement. I cannot order God around. I cannot dictate to him how things are going to happen and on what timetable. So am I willing to submit even when I don't like his timetable and don't like what's going on? I remember...
Look, I want you to run too fast past, because that's really the opposite of entitlement. Entitlement is, I deserve this.
Yes.
In my mind, I feel like I deserve something because of status. What I performed, I've done something that merits this.
Yeah.
And so,
even as a Christian,
if I think about the opposite of it, it's, I don't deserve this. So you could say, I don't deserve a cancer journey. I don't deserve this to happen to me. And now here you are, there's something there in the midst of that.
Yes. And, like, wow, Lord, I've all these losses and limits that I have now. But look at Jesus, who didn't consider his equality with God to be held on to, but empty. Scripture says he emptied himself and took on the form of man or humankind. And even went to the point, submitted and went to the point of the cross, went to the cross.
I'm going to stick with that last piece there for a bit, because I think it really gets to the heart of the wall's purpose is to move us out of an entitlement to the opposite of entitlement. It recognizes our powerlessness. It recognizes that we don't have this place, something that we feel like we deserve or owed. It's moving us to a reality of we don't deserve, and we can look at that from both angles. Both we don't deserve the goodness that's been given us, but also so many cancer journeys are not somebody's fault; they happened, and so we don't deserve. But there's something rich there that's being given in the midst of that. That's also a rich gift, and so what a really cool way to think about this.
Yeah.
Maybe a place to wrap this concept for today in that sense. But anything you want to add as we're closing this out?
I remember 2005, I heard the Lord speak to my soul, my spirit, and say, I want you to be transparent. So I interpreted that as a public thing. 10 years went by and nothing was happening. Again, could I wait on God? I mean, and what if it never happened? And then I had that 2015 surgery that was, well, you're not, buddy, this is an end-of-life journey now. And it's like, well, what happened to
what you told me?
Yeah, to the transparency issue and being transparent about this journey. And he did it in his time. Because after that, then I was asked, and I've always been asked to do stuff, to speak, to do a book, to, all that kind of stuff.
You had an Abraham moment.
Yes.
You were given a promise, and before the promise could be fulfilled, it looked like it couldn't be fulfilled. And then God's like, no,
he gets it at 75, has Isaac when he's 99.
So maybe you're going to live to be 130. I don't know. We'll see.
No, I don't.
You're going to outlive me. I'll say that. So
anyway, it's a great topic. Thanks, Sean.
So the only thing before we close, there's one question I have, and it's more lighthearted. So you said you went to Israel, and she was a leader, and you were a guide.
No,
she was the guide, and you were the leader.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, so because we call me the facilitator and you the host, and I can't tell the difference between a leader and a guide is. So now maybe everybody's just as confused about this here.
Israel is very particular about licensing guides, and guides are incredibly knowledgeable and are in control of the tour. And so all I did was babysat, except I don't want people who went to think that.
So you were the babysitter.
I refer to them as babies.
And they were the...
So I didn't do much except help people, like...
So I'm the babysitter.
Crowd control.
I'm the babysitter, and you are the licensed speaker. I love this.
Well, one important thing I did every day was I made fun of people on the bus. I had the microphone, and I would say things about everyone. That was a very important job.
Makes sense. Well, I think we've closed in the right place here now.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for listening.
All right.
I hope you have a blessed day.
Blessings.